And okay, we are recording. We're here today by both halves of Franca, which is cool. So I'm happy that we were able to connect with you guys. And Sierra's in the studio, and Jasmine, where are you at home right now? Or
yeah, I'm at home. We're taking turns. 1 week Sierra will go in, and then we'll leave the studio for a couple of days to like ventilate, and then I'll go in for another week, and so on. So we're trying to stay semi-sane that way.
Yeah, we were out for like 2 weeks. Neither of us were in the studio, and I think that's the longest we've been away from the studio since we started Franca. So
yeah. Cool. Well, yeah. Do you maybe just want to start with like a really brief overview of when you start, like when Franca started and how it started and where you're located at?
Yeah. So we started the studio in, I think
2016.
Yeah, in like August of 2016. Originally we were in a space in Bed-Stuy, and then we are currently in Bushwick, like right on the Bed-Stuy-Bushwick border. And yeah, so we basically produce everything in-house. We slip cast, and we have our 2 little scut kilns that we make everything out of. But I can show you guys around the studio in a second. But is there anything you want to add, Hasmeen?
No, that's pretty much it.
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting us into your studio virtually. And I got to stop by one time during an open house. It's such a nice space.
Yeah, we love the building. We got really lucky. We had to move very abruptly from our previous building because they lost power, so the kilns were basically not operating. So we had to like move frantically, and we got lucky. We found this space and we fell in love with it because there's like windows everywhere. And we share the floor with a bunch of other people, a lot of ceramicists, so it's nice to kind of have friends on the floor that you can like bounce ideas off of, or like throw their pieces in the kiln or throw your pieces in their kiln. So it's kind of a nice creative space.
Cool.
But yeah, so maybe I'll show you guys around the studio. It's pretty small. It's 660 square feet. So, so when you come in, this is what you see. There is Bowie. So first we will introduce you guys to the puppers. This is Bowie. He sleeps 99.9% of the day.
And the rest of the day, it's all trouble.
Yeah. And then this is Uma. Umi. She just wants to be pet all day. She doesn't want to do anything.
She's a civilized one, for sure.
So this is our very messy office area where we email, do some design work, and always are fiddling with a broken printer, which if anyone out there who has a ceramic studio knows a printer that can survive dust, we would like recommendations. That's our messy packaging area. And then these are our shelves. So most stuff is for orders or stock for our online sales, or just like prototypes and stuff, and bisqueware. So it's kind of like a mix. And then over here are our greenware shelves. We work with a bunch of different clay bodies at the studio. So you'll see on the shelves, there's some kind of red, which is terracotta. And we have porcelain, which is the white. And then we work with a white earthenware, which is the more gray. And then we work with mason stain. So a lot of the gray on the shelves is actually black porcelain. So we keep track of all of the different types of clay and make sure we don't contaminate anything. And then this is the main part of the studio. So the far table with all the pieces is our glazing station, and then the table with the molds in the front is our slip casting table. Sorry, and then these are our mold shelves, which carry quite a lot of weight, and periodically we go through and kind of work out which molds need to be thrown out if they're not casting well, and we end up dumping them. And then here are our kilns, which I think this one probably has a little bit of stuff in them. Luckily enough, before all of this craziness happened, we changed our elements out, so the kiln should be good for a little bit. And then there's our wheel where we trim, and that's pretty much it. So the studio is really small. We usually have upwards of like 3 to 4 to 5 people in here, but everyone kind of has like a station, and then we just take it from there.
Cool. Yeah, and how, like, do you have people in there like 5 days a week?
Yeah, so actually when Hasmin and I first started Franca, we were in like 7 days a week and it was a disaster because we were just trying to produce and like keep up with orders. And then we very quickly learned that we need to stick to a 5 days a week and take weekends off. So we are in the two of us full time, and then we have 3 part-time assistants who currently are working from home. And it's a tricky with ceramic studio because there's not that much digital work to do. So we're kind of getting real creative with projects that we can work on remotely.
Yeah, but we're also getting done like all the things that we can never, we just never have time to do while we're dealing with production. So it's actually kind of good that we're able to do this now, and like everyone is able to work remotely on this.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things have been pushed further and further away because no one wants to deal with it essentially. Are basically getting done now. So it's forcing us to deal with stuff.
Yeah, that's good. Someone wrote in and asked if you use molds for all of the different slips, or do you have different molds for each different type of clay body that you're casting?
We currently try to keep our molds pretty separate. So like anything for porcelain is usually just for porcelain, and even white porcelain, like we categorize it like within the colors in the clay bodies, but we do switch between, like especially when we're prototyping, we'll like cast with white earthenware in the same molds, but terracotta is the only clay body you can't share molds with, or you can, but you have to be really careful because you have to do a couple waste casts. But we try to keep our molds pretty separate. So behind me, this is like all our porcelain, and then on that side is our earthenware, and then on the floor is a bunch of terracotta and like random molds and stuff. But we have a lot of buckets, as do all slip casting studios, but it's like really important to like label all your buckets and label all your molds so you know what is what basically, so you're not contaminating any molds.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you two both have learned a lot in the 4 years that you've been open, did you say?
Yeah.
But how much did you two know about casting and like ceramic manufacturing when you two decided to start? Because that must have been kind of crazy, right? To just like decide that you're going to start
Hasmin and I kind of just like met for dinner, like out of the blue. We were friends at Pratt and roommates for a period of time, but we just like had like basically it was a kind of like a New Year's catch-up dinner, and we came up with the idea for Franca, not even realizing it was going to be a ceramic studio. We still kind of call ourselves a design studio because we're hoping to like branch off into other materials and fields and potentially outsourcing stuff in the future, but we both took ceramics at Pratt, and Hasmin, I think, had actually a CAMI as a teacher.
Oh, cool.
And I actually took a bunch of independent studies under Keith Simpson, who I think you guys know as well. I think I saw that you guys did a tour with him.
Oh, so you were ready for it, just
yeah. So I mean, I did an independent study, which is like a very loose, I don't know if I would call it like a structured of any sorts. And I like learned how to make molds at Pratt, but I really wasn't good. And I look at photos every so often, like that pop up on like my Google Photos, and it's like horrifying to see like what kind of crazy molds I made in college. But I learned the bulk of my slip casting knowledge in Jingdezhen, and that's like where it's only 2 hours south of like where I grew up, and so it's not that by plane. And so I started going more frequently after I graduated from Pratt, and then spent like periods of months there just like learning from different masters. And so Hasmin and I still go, Hasmin about once a year, and I go a couple times a year. And so we still do production for other people there and get some of our master molds made and facilitate some other stuff, but we buy a lot of tools there. But that's like where I've learned the most knowledge, because it's, if you don't know where Jingdezhen is, I would recommend like Googling it and looking at some of the history for their porcelain production, because it's a really, really cool place for ceramics.
Yeah, weren't you supposed to go really recently?
I was supposed to be there probably right now. And China has officially closed their borders to all foreigners and suspended visas, so I will not be going for a while. And yeah, but actually Jingdezhen, other cities in China right now are kind of open to foreigners if you were already in China, but Jingdezhen, because it's such a small city, they're so paranoid about foreigners bringing coronavirus in, that my actual like studio space that we like rent there, they've completely banned foreigners. So even if I was in Jingdezhen right now, I couldn't even physically get into my studio. Our friend Jeremy, who's American, who lives there full time, he can't even access his studio right now because it's in that kind of like district within Jingdezhen. And so I feel like it's obviously good to be in New York and be home, but it's a little frustrating because I wish I could be there working. Yeah.
Someone is asking if we make our own slip or if we buy it commercially. They say they use the Laguna porcelain, but they have like issues with the Amico commercial clear glaze.
So we have had that exact same issue. We work with commercial slip, which I think our studio is like right on the cusp of like being, if we were a little bit bigger, we should definitely make our own slip, but we're limited by size in New York, so we don't want to have a slip tank in here and deal with all of the dry materials. So we work with like a commercial Laguna slip, and we used to work with a Amico clear as well for a glaze, and we had crazy issues. And we ended up stop working with that, and we started working with like a clear Laguna. And even then we still have to add some stuff to it to get it to shrink. I think the Laguna clay bodies, the porcelain ones, tend to shrink a couple % more than like most other porcelain. So I think that's why people have like glazing issues. So I would recommend not using a clear Amico with a Laguna clay body.
Yeah, no, that didn't work for us. We tried everything.
Yeah, we still have a bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket of Amico clear that we don't know what to do with because we stopped using it after we had like at least 50 to 100 pieces come out bad. But yeah. So maybe I'll start slip casting just because it will take a little bit of time to actually have the pieces beep and show how I pour out. And I also cast a bunch of pieces this morning that I can demold because things sometimes take a couple hours and it's been a little humid in New York. So let me just set the computer up.
Oh yeah, pieces have definitely been taking longer to demold lately, so glad you did that.
Okay. I don't know, I hope you guys can hear me from that far away. If not, Hasmeen can kind of chime in, but
we can hear you.
Yes. So basically I'm going to show you guys how I cast in a couple of different types of molds. The first one, which is just our most simple shape, and it's a simple 2-part mold, is this guy, which is, we call it our Costa Bottle, and it's just a simple 2-part mold that opens horizontally. This is what it looks like finished. The mold itself is pretty straightforward. It opens up like this. You can kind of see the 2 halves. And the only tricky thing with a mold like this, because the opening is so small, you have to be really careful pouring slip in. You have to let enough air out so you don't create like this like gulping motion. And then same for when you're pouring it out, you have to let air in. So it's kind of just like you have to be, with molds with small openings, you have to kind of pour them a little bit slower than a normal slip cast mold. So I'm gonna grab a brush so I can dust these molds out. And then let me first show this one too. So this is a plate mold, which is, we call them pressure cast molds, which I don't know if that's the right term in the US, but that's what they call them in China. But basically it has no timer, you're casting it solid. So for anything that you don't want, you want a very uniform thickness and doesn't have crazy height or depth to it, you can do a pressure mold. And so basically it just looks, it's kind of hard to see, but it just looks like the profile of the inner part of the plate. And that you just, usually we let it cast for about like half an hour, but probably 10-15 minutes is enough.
Yeah, a pressure cast mold was something that I hadn't heard of until I talked to Cami Klamako, actually. And I think she learned about them when she was in Jingdezhen. Is that
yeah. That's how they make plates in Jingdezhen, and I think that's how a lot of factories for like mass production do. The way we pressure cast here, we just use like a coupling. So basically something from Home Depot that's like this size. So the way pressure molds work is you need X amount of pressure to actually force the slip into the negative void of your mold. So obviously like a really big plate, you would need a lot of pressure. And I've seen it in Jingdezhen where they use like a 2-liter Coke bottle, they cut off the top, they kind of like wedge a bunch of clay and they pour the slip in really fast. So it's kind of like you need enough pressure to actually have your cast come out without like rings and deforming. But then for like high volume production, what they do is they design the molds to have basically like inner channels that connect between them, and they'll stack like 20 plate molds on top of each other. And then they basically have this like giant clamp that clamps them all together, and they use an air compressor and they force slip somehow through all of them. And so it's like an extreme form of pressure mold. So that's like the real method for like production and pressure molds. And then this is our kind of like how we do it at the studio for one mold at a time and creating small amounts of pressure. But yeah, it's definitely, we've taught some mold making workshops where people want to make like a plate pressure mold and they made pretty big ones. And I think you kind of have to work out like how much, it takes a lot of trial and error to work out how much pressure do you actually need. So you're not making a huge mess every time. And then this is a super simple teacup mold where this is basically the mouth that we're going to trim off later. And then this is just the body. And then the only other mold I think that's a little bit different that I wanted to show you guys is this is our stacked planter. And the top is slip cast. So we set a timer to keep the thickness uniformed. But then the bottom half of the mold is pressure cast. So it casts solid. And so the way this mold opens up, you can't really, you slide the two edges off and then you can lift it off. So this is what the form looks like if you just look at it like this. And I like to keep our molds from getting damaged. So I'm putting it upside down so this side that touches the other plaster doesn't get anything stuck on it. And then just so you guys can see, so basically the inner part that you see this negative void here is going to cast solid. There's going to be like a layer of slip here where we later punch a hole for the planter. And then this is the top part of our planter that just casts for like 30 or 40 minutes.
Can you just show a finished one if we have one nearby, just so they can visualize what this is?
Yeah. So that is basically for this form. And the reason why it's half pressure, half normal slip cast mold, if it was all a slip cast mold, the bottom would have a surface here. And then we wanted there to be like an actual solid layer. So we didn't want this to be open. If it was a complete slip cast mold, it would all be open in the inside and your plant would fall through. So this is a more complicated mold and timing is more precise with it because you can't let it dry in the mold too much because basically the cast starts to shrink and get stuck on this plaster part. So I cast 2 or 3 this morning that I'm gonna probably demold in the next like 10-15 minutes and actually get them to like kind of like pop off, and then you catch them and you like let them dry. But the rest of the mold you can leave for like hours after you cast and demold whenever you want. And it's not as time sensitive. Yeah.
That's wild. I've never seen a mold like that.
Yeah, it's easy to nick the form when you're taking it, especially this is a small one, so it's okay. But the big ones, when you're sliding off the walls, you have to be really careful that you like slide them and lift them off without hitting the actual cast itself. Yeah. So
either way, we try to leave the pieces inside the mold for as little time as possible. I mean, so they're dry enough to demold without warping, but not leave them in too long so the mold lasts longer because it's, you know, dealing with less humidity of the shape.
Yeah, it's something that like I think, and I really wasn't taught this in school, where people would like do a cast really quickly in between classes and then just like leave it in their mold for like 2-3 days, and then when they remember to go back and demold it. And so it's like if you can avoid leaving wet casts in your mold overnight, it will like help your molds last longer because you're taking care of them and they're not damp all the time. And then when you demold, ideally you have your mold can dry in between. You're not immediately doing another cast. So if you leave a cast in your mold overnight, your mold's going to be super damp in the morning, and then you're going to immediately cast in it again. It's kind of just like your mold is always wet, and it's not great for the life of your mold. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to dust everything out and rubber band everything, and then I'm going to get casting. So this will just take a minute, I think.
Cool.
Yeah.
You teach casting workshops out of Franca sometimes, right?
Yeah, we do. We teach like a 1-day slip casting workshop for people who really don't have any background in ceramics, and some do. And then we teach a mold making workshop as well. That's like a full day, and that's usually other ceramicists who take it, I think. Yeah.
Someone was asking about sort of how we make molds from master molds. Do you want to quickly pull out a master mold when you have a second so they can see?
There's lots of different types of master molds. We work with plaster master molds. It's not like regular #1 pottery plaster. It's a lot more dense and stronger. But basically, a master mold is a mold of a mold. But we just make, pull one off.
Just the cup mold or something like that, yeah.
So this is a master mold, and that's for this shape. So basically it is just the positive half form. And what we do is we soak them in water so they get all the air that's inside out. And then we wrap the plastic wrap around them and basically mold soap it up, wipe off all the mold soap, and then pour plaster. And so when you need to make molds off of a master mold, you can usually get, if you're good with your timing, like 5 to 6 out a day. If you're not good with your timing, maybe like 2 or 3 out a day. But a master mold in plaster is a lot cheaper than a rubber silicone one, but it's also, you have to take care of them because they do degrade. So you can probably get about like 30 to 40 casts off of a plaster master mold, versus like the rubber ones, you can probably get a lot more. So I think it just depends on how much production you think you're gonna do. But for us, because we change our designs and we tweak little things on them, we feel like it's easier for us to just deal with plaster master molds.
For anyone who's interested, there's a post, sort of an old post where you see us making a mold out of a master mold on our sort of larger planter, the XL planter, and you'll see what we mean by wrapping that shape in plastic, in a clear plastic, and then pouring the plaster onto it. So if you scroll down our Instagram, you're going to see a video of that for anyone who's interested.
And then I'm rubber banding the molds, most of them with 1 or 2. Our bigger molds, we do 4 if they're multiple part molds, like 3 or 4 part molds. And then our giant molds, we use straps. I prefer rubber bands in general, just because I feel like straps, when you're slip casting, like always get slip on them and get dirty and like flake off. But I think it just like depends on the way you're used to casting.
The way Sierra's putting the rubber bands on, she's doing them in general, like if you can see, like at an angle. So that's where the rubber band is like creating the largest amount of pressure, keeping the pieces together. But also she wants to keep the rubber band away from the opening. So when you pour the slip in or pour the slip out, it doesn't sort of make a mess, like going off the rubber band and then dripping back into the mold.
And also for slip casting, you never want your rubber band in your mold. You don't want to ever pull the rubber band over your opening because you're likely gonna get like dust or flakes of slip off. So the way we do it is you get it on half and then you pull it under from the bottom side, if that makes sense. But basically, like you can tell if your mold is like secure or not. Like if you're holding it like this and giving it a little tug, it shouldn't really open, which that one just did, but I know it's fine. But I think for the most part, you want to use a rubber band that's like pretty hard to put on. If the rubber band's like far too easy to put on, then you're most likely gonna have some slip that comes out of the seam. Okay, cool. So I have my timers set, which times for slip casting depend on the weather, on your clay body, on your mold's life, a bunch of different factors, but I basically preset the timers just because they're really annoying. They're very beepy. And then I'm gonna mix the slip. I'll move the computer actually. And then the mold with a small opening and the pressure mold, I'm gonna use couplings, which are basically just these PVC pipes. And then the way we adhere them to our molds are we're gonna dip them about halfway up in the slip that we're casting with, and we're gonna stick them onto the tops of the mold. So they immediately will like adhere, and it kind of gives us like this larger opening to pour and like fill to a higher level. Because with slip casting, the level drops the longer you cast. And so for something with such a small opening like this, the level would like within a minute drop like 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch, and then you have to constantly be filling it up. And we don't want to do that. So we use these couplings where we just fill it up 3/4 of the way and like leave it for the 13 minutes it's casting. So yeah. Okay, sorry. And then we store all of our slip in airtight buckets. And then I'm gonna mix the slip and then I'm pouring it directly into this metal bucket. And this is a bucket that has like a built-in sieve. So basically it will catch any chunks that are coming off the drill or the side of the main bucket. If you don't have a bucket like this, you need to sieve your slip into a clean bucket to basically catch stuff, because otherwise all those things would just fall into your mold.
So for example, for the pressure mold, you want to make sure that your slip is not too thick. If it's too thick, even though it has pressure, it'll create like the lines because it'll like have trouble going in, you know, it'll be slower. So you want your slip to definitely be liquid enough so it goes in smoothly.
Yeah, do you like check specific gravity and things like that as you go?
We do not. We are really good at eyeballing it with the Darvan. We have checked specific gravity every so often, and our thicknesses are not so precise that they need to be like the exact same for every single thing. So that's just something we don't do as a studio, but I know it's the right thing to do. Just not to do it.
Just don't do what we do.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between someone that does it like once every 6 months and people that are doing it every day.
I mean, when we weren't in the studio for the last 2 weeks, and our buckets, even if they're sealed, we had to pour a little bit of Darvan and mix them for like longer than normal. So I mean, we definitely add Darvan to our slip quite regularly, but I think otherwise it's a lot of work to like measure the specific gravity every day before you cast. We're casting with 4 different types of slip almost every day, so it's not worth. It's just too much work. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do the couplings. So basically, I try to pick couplings from Home Depot that are really smooth because like often they have like lettering. So you want something that's going to adhere to like the flat surface of your mold. If your mold is made a little wonky or something, you're going to have issues with getting a coupling to attach. But
just add some clay and you'll be fine. Yeah.
You dip it in, and then you want to make sure you don't get any drips that fall into your mold. So I shake it off a little, and then usually within like 2-3 seconds, it's adhered. So if I give it like a little twist, it's not coming off, it's stuck. Same for this guy. I'm just gonna get that closer.
Someone wrote in and asked about how much Darvan do you add per gallon or 5 gallons?
It's hard. So we usually have in our casting buckets, we try to have about 4 gallons of slip that we're working with per bucket. It's probably only like a tiny splash. So it's probably like maybe.
You just want to go in like a little bit of a time and then mix it and see how it feels, and then add a little bit, because we honestly don't have a measuring, it's just we eyeball it, to be honest.
Error on like adding too little Darvan. Only once in my life have I ever added too much Darvan, and it really messes your slip up. So I think you just need to like add small amounts, but then you have to really mix your slip well. If you add Darvan and you mix it for like 10 seconds, it's still gonna look super thick. And so I feel like you have to let your slip mix really well. It's the same like our terracotta, we almost never add Darvan to, but every time we open the bucket, it looks solid. But as soon as we start mixing it for like 45 seconds to a minute, it's like completely liquid and it casts really thin. So I think it just like depends on your clay body, and the longer you work with that clay body, you'll understand like how much to add and how much not to add. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna start with this guy. And so basically, as I mentioned before, I'm gonna pour this one really slowly because I want to always basically see that opening. So air is coming out as I'm pouring in. So.
I'm holding my breath. This is amazing.
Well, because I have that coupling, I don't have to be worried about it overflowing. If you don't have a coupling and you have a small opening, it's super easy to like overflow and spill everywhere. And so for the pressure mold, I'm actually going to pour as fast as I can. So it kind of forces the slip down. And then obviously you won't be able to see it from the camera, but I will see it drop a little bit in the coupling because that's basically the slip going in. But it's the pressure mold, you can't fill it in slowly because it will basically clog because it has such a small opening.
And she'll see like as the level goes down, she's going to keep adding slip, so the pressure keeps going.
It dropped about 1/4 inch, so I'm just going to like fill it up a little bit more. But it's not that big of a pressure mold, so it's probably fine. And then same for this one. The pressure mold, I'm just going to pour it to let all the air out, and then I can pour it fast for the actual slip casting mold. And for this is an earthenware that I'm casting with. It's pretty stable. We don't have air bubbles really that get stuck in them, but our porcelain, we usually fill things 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch from the top, and then we give them all like a pretty good shake to get any air bubbles to come up. But I think that just like depends on your clay body and if you have air bubbles and those kind of issues.
But if you do that, definitely make sure that you have like a mouth on your mold, so you fill up to the mouth, and then you can stop and shake the piece. You don't want to like fill up to half of, where your piece still is, where the shape is, not the mouth, because if you do that, you'll have a line there and it won't look as great. So just make sure that you fill it up to the mouth, and then you can shake it to make sure the bubbles go up.
Cool. So I'm gonna demold these guys, and I'm gonna try to do it in such a way where you guys can see the best. Sorry, it's a little harder. Okay. So this is our stacked planter. So it's the same as the white one I showed you guys earlier, and this is the medium size, but it's in terracotta. So basically, this is when I was talking about why we rubber band. And you can still see this mold is getting quite old, and it's still leaked a little bit. That's like this guy, so it might actually be a little bit harder to demold, but we'll give it a go and see.
Someone is asking about the sieve in the picture. Yes, there is a sieve in the picture. And then if we get our master molds made, or do we make them ourselves?
We get our master molds made. We outsource that. And then for molds that we're just testing out and stuff, we make everything in-house. But otherwise, any design that we're putting into production, because we wholesale, we usually invest in a master mold.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I'm demolding, I like to get all the rubber bands and everything like out of the way. And then basically with this mold, you want to check that your piece feels like, and you can see it's kind of dropped, it's starting to shrink. And so what I'm going to do is just pull this half straight out. I can't pull it up because of the shape. It would literally like rip out half your piece. So what I'm going to do is slide this out. And so you can see the mold is quite old, so that leaked. I would say that's like not a good example, but it is what it is, I guess. And then I'm going to pull the other half. And again, I'm flipping these upside down, and you can even stack them on each other. I won't because of the height, but you don't ever want to damage the inside part of your mold. So like if you're ever demolding something, you don't want to place it face down because you're going to scratch or damage or get something stuck to it. And so because this is a planter, I'm actually going to punch the hole in the mold right now. So.
You want to show the tool?
Yeah, I need to find the right tool. We have everything labeled. Hasmin makes fun of my label maker at the studio, but I label all the buckets and all the tools. So this is our little hole puncher for the large planter.
OCD shows,
Oh, it's so easy to like find a bucket that doesn't have a label, and you're like, what is this? Is it glaze?
It keeps it interesting.
So basically, I'm gonna punch. It's a lot easier to punch a hole when the thing is wet. Occasionally we forget, and we have to do it when it's dry, and it never goes well. So I'm just gonna punch a hole.
Jen Waybrick wrote in and asked about the design process and how you arrive at the designs and at the collections that you make.
Yeah, I'll let Hasmin answer that while I continue to slowly demold stuff, because it'll take me a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, we basically do like a mood board, you could say. And we decide, for example, well, what do we want to work on? Like lately, we've been interested in lighting. So we create a mood board, and then we start sharing sketches, and then but completely open, with no specific direction, just like that mood board as a guide. And if we like both see something in each other's paths that we like, then we start designing more towards that path and try to make at least 2 or 3 pieces that relate to each other within that collection. So we try to not have like this one-off piece that doesn't relate to anything else.
Yeah, when we started Franca, we had kind of decided to like design stuff in collections, because I think it's easy in ceramics to like make these like one-off pieces that are amazing, but then it's hard to see them in like a space, if that makes sense. So I feel like we really strive to make sure if we like the design of something, we have to put it into a family. And so that probably takes us the most time to like find other pieces and shapes that are cohesive. And that's like our Costa collection. It's 4 different bottles, 4 different shapes, 4 different heights. But it's something we thought like the bottle as a one-off people will like to buy, but potentially they'll buy them as a set, or they'll have them in different parts of their house, not even together. But we thought it's just like, it makes sense to design stuff as a collection. Like why the stacked planters, we have 3 sizes. We're currently working on an even larger size for the stacked planters. The only issue is it's going to be super heavy to like flip over. And so that's something like we're limited by how much weight when the mold is filled with slip can we like physically without spilling pour over safely.
Someone is asking if we use 3D modeling, hand-thrown, built, or both. So we usually do maybe 3D modeling.
Yeah, we do a lot of CAD, which is something that I had learned in school. And when it's too complicated, we outsource the CAD work. So we'll 3D print stuff. We also work with a plaster lather we basically give them like a technical drawing or a profile drawing, and they will lathe stuff. So for these planters, we sketched them out, we knew what curves we wanted, and then we actually just got them lathed, like enlarged, like the 8% or 9% that this terracotta shrinks in plaster. And then we got the master molds made once we knew that the molds worked. And so I think CAD is a really powerful, like, it's just like for ceramics, because you can like model anything three-dimensionally, and then you can actually like physically see it quite quickly before actually having to try to make it exactly how you want it to look. So a lot of our forms are, yeah, definitely CAD based.
And then you always have to remember, thinking ahead, if you're working with molds, if you're going to work with porcelain or terracotta or low fire, to know the shrinkage. So the positive shape that you make needs to be either 8% larger or 15% larger. So you need to keep that like plan ahead and know which material you're going to use before you start making your positive shape and then your molds. So that was a learning curve, definitely.
So this was a pressure mold that I cast this morning. So I just want to show you guys what it looks like when you demold it. So I've already poured out the excess slip that was in the coupling. So this basically, I can scrape all of this off and reclaim it. Usually when we're casting, we have one half of the table for one clay body and one half for the other, and then a third clay body on another table, just so we don't have any contamination. So we can actually like recycle and reclaim all of our scraps.
Kelly wrote in and said, "This is so helpful, thank you." And yeah, I feel the same way. This is cool to watch.
This is a pressure mold, and there is like this little like nub, and that's super easy. You can just like trim it off with like usually a sharper blade than this, but basically just for this demo, because you want
to wait until it's dry and then just sand it off.
Yeah, but I was gonna like, let it dry. Yeah. But basically, if it doesn't want to come off because it's like shrinking, I cast this much earlier in the day, it's already kind of shrunk too much on the positive that's underneath it. So I'm gonna wait, oh, this came off now, or I'm gonna shoot air around it and it will pop it off. When you're using the air compressor with slip cast pieces, because they're so thin, you have to be really careful not to blow your piece out. And it's something that like we make the mistake every so often if we get impatient and we want to like go home and it's like past 6, 7 at night, and we'll try to use the air compressor and it will blow a hole through the piece. So you have to be really careful. But basically this is what it looks like, and it will always cast this thickness every single time. So I'm gonna let this guy just dry upside down. We let everything dry on plaster boards, but for the sake of having stuff in the shot, I'm just gonna leave everything on the table. And then I wanted to demo, this is our large planter. So again, I'm gonna punch the hole, and then we prefer to clean everything dry. That's just the way our studio operates. But there's a lot of slip casters who prefer to clean stuff up when it's wet. So I'm gonna actually show you guys with a wire tool how to clean things up when it's wet. Okay, so I punched the hole. And so I'm basically using the actual flat part of the top of the mold as a guide, and I'm going to just cut. You have to time this as well, because if you wait too long and it's too dry, you're going to be putting too much force to cut. So basically, I'm going to cut that down. And then you want to be really careful and use the same amount of pressure all the way around, and you don't really want to move it. And so this will go straight to like the reclaim pile, which is going to be over here for now. And then the tricky part with trimming things in the molds are you have to be able to like get them out. Like with these ones, I was able to like lift small pieces. You can lift with one hand. Anything bigger, I recommend lifting with two so you don't deform it when it's wet. But for something like this, because you trimmed it in the mold, you have to get a plasterboard and flip it to get it out properly. Or you can like let it dry a little bit more, but I think the chances of you deforming it because it doesn't have the structure of the mouth is a lot easier to deform. So basically this I'm going to leave in the mold and then flip it over later. And then
people that trim in the mold also sometimes use mouths that go out as opposed to in, like ours. Like as you can see, like in the stacked terracotta planter, you can see what I mean by the mouth going in. The mouth going out would be the opposite, essentially. So the extra space would just be
personal aesthetic. Every manufacturer has different ways they like their molds, and these are just the way we like ours. So this is a 3-part mold. This is for a pitcher. So again, it has like a lot of rubber bands. I think it's safer to err on the side of over rubber banding your mold than under rubber banding it because it's such a mess when your mold leaks. We've had a few interns at the studio who have had some very big spills, especially in terracotta.
And it's always in that part of the studio where Sierra is now. Like every spill happens, it's cursed.
Also, slip is so messy to clean up. So with this one, I don't have to slide off because there's nothing underneath it. So basically I'm gonna lift the bottom off and so you can see the cast. And then if your piece feels like it's a little bit stuck, what you can do is like bang your mold basically like straight down on the table. And that often kind of gives it the little bit of jiggle it needs to release. So if you feel like your piece is dry and it should be releasing and it's not for some reason, giving it like a little bit of a tap often helps. And so I'm gonna lift this straight up. And then, again, I don't wanna damage this part of the mold. And then what I'm gonna do is use my right hand on the top and my left hand on the bottom and basically lift it and like place it right here.
For a piece like that, it's important, as you can see, we have like a slight curve at the bottom. It's important that the piece is definitely dry enough. If it's not dry enough before you release it and place it on a surface, it's gonna sort of sag a little bit and that curve is gonna change. So if you wanna be very, careful with the shape of your piece, just let it dry a little longer so you make sure that it keeps the shape and the weight of the piece doesn't affect the curve.
So this is for a shape that looks like this. It's a vase, and it's quite big. We still have one size bigger that we go, and the reason why we use a strap just because it's so annoying to try to rubber band this, but then we also use just like wood blocks, and we actually use like Jenga blocks because our studio mate was throwing away a bunch of Jenga sets, so we took them all. And you can cut your own little wood scraps, but it's actually really nice to have uniformed blocks at the studio. So buy a cheap Jenga thing, but basically we want to keep the strap off the top of the mold because we don't want it to be touching the slip. Same for when you're pouring it out. You want to try to keep your mold, like your strap, as clean as possible. But okay, something is beeping, so I'm going to go back over there.
The Jenga block is a really good tip there.
Yeah, our studio mate threw out like 3 things of Jenga. And so
it was a giant Jenga thing. It was crazy.
So basically this guy, I'm actually going to try to move closer. So usually when we're casting, we have a waste bucket just so we don't like just drop everything on the table and have to clean it up later. So I'm just getting like an empty container. And we like to pour away from the rubber bands. So the same for when I pour out that teacup, I'm not going to pour it over the rubber band because then you're just making more of a mess. So I'm going to start pouring this out pretty slowly because if you flip it completely upside down right now, it creates like a vacuum and the form would actually just like cave in on itself. So if you ever have a slip cast piece that looks like it was like a balloon that shrunk or something, it's because you created like a vacuum without knowing. So I'm pouring this slowly. I'm going to remove the coupling and then just place it in here so later we can like go try to save as much of the clay. And then basically I'm going to pour really slowly. So it's like just like letting air go in and keep the form. So when you're slip casting lots of pieces, you really want to make sure you set your timers off in such a way where they're not all going to beep at the same time because some of our molds, our really chubby bottle, takes like 3 or 4 minutes to pour out. And so if you cast like 5 of them and they all go out at the same time, you're kind of screwed because the last one is going to be cast solid pretty much.
With larger openings, that's not a problem. We definitely cast a bunch that beep at the same time. And as long as you have like, enough space for all of them to be flipped over. Like we like to preferably flip them over the bucket and have them dry, just dripping the slip on the bucket so it doesn't make a huge mess on the table. So we time it so we have, let's say, 3 buckets available with porcelain, and so we put a couple of like wooden sticks on the bucket so we can place a mold upside down and it just drips into the bucket. So we time things so they can all drip, dry, and then the next, let's say, 5 mug molds beep. So we can flip over the ones that were dripping before. Those are dry. We can flip them over and have them right side up. And then the rest of the mugs can go on the buckets and drip again, and so on. So depending on what kind of openings and shapes and drying times you have, you can plan your casting day, essentially.
This was the teacup, which I beeped, so I poured it out. But basically, I poured that out really fast because the opening is big. Later, we'll use like a rib and clean up that lip. It's important to clean up the lip here and the excess slip, because if you let it dry for too long, basically air is going to enter your mold and your cast everywhere but there. So it's going to kind of deform your piece a little bit. So it's actually important. It takes about 10 minutes, maybe like between 7 to 10 minutes for the cast to be dry. So I'm going to like leave this propped up like this. And then in about 10 minutes, I'm going to flip it over and clean up the edge. If you leave it upside down for like 2 hours, your piece isn't necessarily going to get deformed, but it has like a higher chance of being slightly deformed. So the bottle I left right side up because we want it to be a little bit heavier. So depending on your design, you can either have your pieces dry upside down or right side up. The only important thing with slip casting is you don't want to change your mind. So basically start like lifting it right side up and then down, because you're going to get all these weird drips that you have to sand out later. And so the pressure mold I'm going to pour out now, actually, because I think it's been enough time. And then I'm going to just remove the coupling just because it'll be cleaner. Just make a mess. And then that guy will dry. Move this plate. But yeah, so I'm going to wait a little bit longer to pour that guy out. So let me just finish demolding these. And then the 3 stacked planters that I had pulled out earlier, those require the air compressor. So I'm going to do those last because it's going to be pretty loud. So I'm going to remove the Jenga blocks.
That one, do you think is ready? I doubt it because it takes a little longer usually.
It's ready. I didn't cast this yesterday. I thought that was the purpose.
Okay.
A lot of our molds are a little bit old, so now we have no excuse we have the time to make new ones. So this one, the important thing when you're lifting molds, you have to make sure you lift it with enough clearance so you don't ding your piece. So I'll let it lift. Get straight up. Flip this over, and then I can let this dry on the mold if I want longer, or if I know exactly where I'm going to place it, I can lift it, but it still feels pretty wet, so I'm probably just going to leave it here for another like 10-15 minutes to dry a little bit more. Okay, so let me get the air compressor. So I actually need to punch, these holes. Okay, I'm going to turn on the air compressor. It might be really loud, so you might need to turn your volume down, but let's see.
It's really weird. We can't hear the air compressor at all. Like, at least I can't hear.
Oh, really? Very loud.
Like, wow. I thought it was broken.
Usually when you slip cast, you have like a drying board near you to put everything. So basically I'm going to shoot air all the way around, and then I'm going to shoot air through the hole so it pops up off the floor.
Someone is asking, how often do we clean our sink traps? Definitely not often enough. There's not like it's basically when it tells us it needs to be cleaned. So maybe like every 4 months.
So with a mold, anytime you're carrying a slip cast piece, you want to be careful not to like tilt it because the weight of the wet clay could easily fall over. So with something like this, I'm going to lift it really level. If I tilted it like more than 10 degrees, chances are the whole thing's going to fall off.
If your mold leaks for any reason, it's easier to clean all of that at this point as opposed to leaving it and waiting until it's dry. It's more likely that you'll damage your mold or scratch it by trying to get the dry slip out. So if you get any leaking, clean it up as you're demolding.
Okay. So I have demolded pretty much everything. So I'm gonna guess I'll start glazing some pieces, and then when that timer goes off, I will go back over and pour that out. So let me see.
So on a normal workday, are you doing like all of these different, like are you casting pieces while you're glazing and things like that?
Yeah, usually one person will be on casting and then one person will be on glazing. It depends on like what needs to get done that day. So it really varies, but usually one person is doing one thing and it's completely separate. So there's no like crossover contamination.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a very small studio, so it's hard. So basically these are the pieces I'm going to glaze. I'm not gonna do all of them in this demo because that would take too long. I'm gonna do these ones here. So basically I'm gonna use this device that we call a glaze shooter, and we're gonna fill the basketball that is connected to a bike tube full of glaze, and we're gonna shoot the glaze because all of our pieces are just glazed like a gloss interior. So just give me a second. So this is our clear glaze. And then after we glaze everything, when we shoot the inside, we actually wipe, and it takes us a long time. If we actually just dipped everything, it would be a lot faster. But when we shoot the inside, we have to like wipe with clean water very carefully, the outside 3 times. So it actually takes like quite a long time.
We do it 3 times because if we do it once or twice, there's like a high chance that it's still gonna get some traces of glaze and it's gonna be like a little bit shiny. So to get it to be fully matte and sort of glaze free on the outside, we have to wipe it like we've concluded like about 3 times.
And each of our mixers is labeled, so we don't mix any slip ones or glaze ones, or even like within the slip and glazes, we don't mix any of them. We don't want to deal with. So we have like a lot of different mixers.
So there's a hole that allows that glaze to go into the tube and into the basketball. So you just need to make sure that the tube is extended and there are no folds. And so the glaze level is going to start to go down. And as it goes down, Sarah will add more glaze until the basketball is full and there's glaze up to a certain level on the basin. So it doesn't make a huge mess when the glaze shoots up. So if there's too little glaze on like in the basin, the glaze is sort of going to go everywhere. So there's like a certain level that covers the opening. So the glaze shoots out sort of cleanly.
So while I'm waiting for the basketball to fill up, I'm just going to dip, because these are dog bowls that are completely gloss. So I'm just going to demo very quickly how we dip them, which is pretty straightforward. Usually count to like 3. And then we obviously don't want any drips, so we hold it upside down. And it's dry. I'll do one more. I would recommend like wiping the tongs every time, but it's important. I think we often like use like a cracked piece or something to first test dip before we start glazing for the day to make sure that it's not too thick or too thin, so we can adjust it if needed. Okay, so this is getting close.
I want to quickly show how the glaze is going down and the thing. So as you can see, the consistency of the glaze also needs to be liquid enough, not too thick, so it'll actually move, easily through the complicated system that we have there.
Yeah. Did you two develop this basketball and bike hose system?
No. We got it in Jingajan.
It's something that they do in Jingajan, and so it's like definitely, it's pretty like you can make it yourself. It's very hard to make it yourself. Like we don't recommend that people try, because it's like if you mess up this connection here, glaze is just going to go everywhere.
Also, the basin is and the stand. It's everything like it's trickier than it looks if you don't know how to like salt metal and stuff like that. So
if your stand is like a couple inches lower, you wouldn't have the right curve of the basketball tube, and then it's just a mess. So I'm actually going to first start with a smaller piece. So this is a mug, and so basically with a glaze shooter, you want to shoot it once ideally, and you want to shoot it for long enough, like with enough pressure that it covers the whole inside, and I guess like long enough that it's thick enough. So it's kind of like you just take some trial and error. So I want to just like give it like a couple shakes, and then when it's dry, I can flip it over. So I'll do another mug.
Sarah, could you move the computer a little closer to so we can see like the thing going?
Should I maybe let me get creative with the angle? I don't know if that will work.
No, I think it was good. Yeah, I think that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll do another mug.
There you go.
And then as you can see, the whole piece is like glazed. And you can do really big pieces. Basically, you could do stuff up to basically the width of your actual basin. And they, in Jingajan, sell different size ones. They even sell in Jingajan one that has 2 of these. So I guess you could use both hands and glaze 2 things at once, because apparently this is too slow. It's definitely, it's a pretty funny contraption. Whoever invented it.
Like a double version? Is that what you said?
They have a double version that has a basketball with 2 tubes. And it's basically just like a wider version of this where you just hold. The only time I've ever seen it in production in Jingajan was at like a Baijiu, like an alcohol factory, where they were just like glazing like crazy bottles. Like, but yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do a slightly larger. This is like a short squat base. So I'm gonna have to use a little bit more force.
So if the glaze level is correct, as you can see, like the glaze is pretty contained and it doesn't make a mess. Someone is asking if we hand paint our pieces. Yes, we hand paint everything.
Yasmin, actually, not me, hand paints everything. I do the speckled pattern and the dot pattern, and then she draws everything else. So everything is hand painted.
Are you always using the same glaze through this basketball pump?
We have like, each glaze has a different basketball.
But you can, and most people in Jingajan, they use multiple ones. You just have to wash it out really well. But because we're working with clear and black glaze mostly, we try not to put them in the same basketball. But you can definitely use different colors. You just have to be really good about washing out your basketball. Which is a very funny phrase.
Yeah, that's right.
But this is a planter which has a hole, and obviously you need to use your thumb or blue tape to cover that hole. Otherwise, when you shoot it, it's gonna just hit you in the face.
It's been known to happen.
It happens a lot at the studio. And so basically, I'm going to shoot this, give it like a little shake, and I have glaze on my thumb, so I want to be careful like not to touch the outside of the piece. And then let me do one more mug. And then I can do one more big vase just so you guys can see it. But other than that, the glaze shooter, that's pretty much all it does.
And so are the exterior of all of these pieces just going to stay just the slip and whatever is on the, okay.
Yeah, just like the raw porcelain in this case and the black underglaze. So Kelly is asking about the wiping 3 times. So because it's not like a super clean method when we shoot the glaze inside the piece,
all this
Yeah.
glaze on the rim. So basically the first wipe we do is like a wipe where we get all the excess glaze and any overshoots off. The second wipe with clean water, clean sponge, we wipe the entire surface of the piece. And then the third wipe is just like to be extra safe. We do like another clean wipe where we're basically wiping and like dipping the sponge each time. So it's like we're not like wiping off and then bringing it back down because you could bring a little bit of glaze back to the bottom. It's basically we don't want to have any like shiny little sheens of glaze anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that is pretty much the glaze shooting. If anyone has glaze shooting questions, we do brush a lot of our glazes. And then these pieces are earthenware, so I'm not going to shoot them because this is a cone 6 glaze. But those I'm going to shoot later with a low fire glaze. And then let me pour this guy out because I think the timer is about to go off in the next minute or so. So you always want to get your blocks ready so you know where your piece is going to go. And then this one I can flip over because it's dry enough. So basically you don't want to flip your piece over too early that it looks shiny on the inside. So as long as it looks matte, which I know is kind of hard to see, but it's safe to flip over. And then that's when you can use your rib. And for your rib, you want to be pushing it outside. You don't want to be going this way because you're going to be pulling the form in. So basically I'm going to go like that. And then you have like a nice clean top. And you can take the rubber band off kind of whenever, as long as you're careful. And then you usually will have to wait this will probably need like another 40 minutes before it will release. So I'm just gonna leave it over here. This one, I'm just gonna clean the little lip. And then it's gonna need a little bit.
So someone is asking since the mugs don't have glaze on the outside, are they dishwasher safe? Yeah, we haven't had any issues with the raw porcelain and any staining or dishwashing, related issues.
For our earthenware pieces, we glaze them in their entirety, but porcelain, we've never had issues with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think, let me see, this is the bottle from earlier today. And let me just see, I think it is ready to demold. So basically I'm gonna give it a little tap and then lift the top part off. And then, yeah, you can see that it's ready to demold. Oops, a little mess. But yeah. So yeah, I can show you how we clean up the bottle on the wheel if you guys are interested, but I think other than that, we've kind of covered most of the steps of the process.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone has any questions of the subcasting process so far.
It's pretty amazing to see how fluid the process is for you both. I feel like there were so many little tips in there that I picked up on that you didn't even say. Like cleaning up the rim with the rib while it's still wet like that was a nice one. But something that I was sort of thinking about is just like how have you dealt with like expansion of like the physical studio space and with just like the logistics, something that like as Gus and I have and Clay has started to venture on like very, very small production lines. We're always like scrambling to make more space out of what we have, but it seems like such an efficient use of space that you have set up.
Sorry, my mascot. In ceramic studios, I feel like you need way more storage than you ever think you're gonna need. And that's something like we've struggled with because as we've expanded and grown, we need more space and we physically just don't have it and we don't wanna move. And so I feel like it's like you have to really like be efficient in the space that you have so you can produce the work that you need to. So like all of our shelves are basically as deep and as tall as they physically can be. But yeah, it's tricky because like being in New York City, you're limited by how much material can you order at any given time and where can you store it and all of that stuff. So I think yeah, it's tricky. We had a storage unit for a while and it just like wasn't sustainable to like have stuff in a storage unit, not at the studio. So now we just get really creative. And we actually have, I can show you really quickly, our very funny packaging station, which is our storage, which is
Keep adding shelves wherever we can, like that.
we built this little loft and it's
was
usually very full. And we like store all of our packaging and boxes and stuff for trade shows and stuff up there. But yeah.
having tall ceilings has proven to be super useful for us. Like we just keep stacking stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me see. One second. Okay, so I think I have everything I need. So basically, I'm using a Giffen grip that's gonna just center the piece. It holds it nice and snug. This piece is bone dry. You can clean up when it's leather hard. It's a little bit trickier because you're more likely to deform it. But basically, I'm just gonna trim off this top part, sand the outside a little bit. And then for all of our vases and bottles, what we do is we basically tap all the dust out and pour very cold water on the inside and then pour it out in the greenware stage to basically get any dust out. Because after you bisque a piece, if you wash your piece out, like any dust that was in there is kind of gonna be stuck and we can't get our hand in such a small opening. And so in the beginning, we had a few pieces that don't leak, but they basically, the foot would get damp and we don't want it to like mess up anyone's tables or spaces or shelves. And so we have come up with this method where we actually rinse everything in the greenware stage, which for bigger pieces, we can get our hand in and we just use a sponge and water. But for any small piece, we just use really cold water. And I can demo that with this bottle once I finish.
Yeah, I would love to see that. That's wild.
Yeah.
If you do it fast enough, it's totally fine. If you're not fast enough, it goes wrong very fast. It's like it collapses, you know, like it's fine.
A blade, I guess. I don't know.
Put it closer to the camera.
Yeah, it's just like an 18 tooth blade. And I just have to make sure it's cutting towards me. So obviously, if it was cutting away from me, it wouldn't do anything. So hold it like this. And I like to keep my right hand on my leg at all times to keep it really steady. And so basically, I'm just going to trim. Oh no, something's wrong with our wheel.
What do you mean?
It's like not spinning.
Oh, did you move the pedal by grabbing it by the cable thing? Make sure that the spring is connected well on the foot.
Oh no. This is a wheel I got on Craigslist, no, on eBay. I won it on an eBay auction, and Mean and I had to go get it in New Jersey in someone's basement.
Anders actually has one of those wheels out in our parents' basement, I think.
Yeah, it's a great wheel. This is the first time I've had problems. Wait.
No, Ellie once grabbed it like by the cable, and it like the spring wasn't connecting well with the pedal. Is that happening?
Oh no.
If it's not working, we're in
okay, well,
big trouble.
Our wheel is broken for the first time ever. But basically what I was gonna do is just shave off the top and then use a sponge and a sanding sponge. I can still do the water stage because it's the same right now, more or less. Yeah. So let me get some water.
Anyone has an extra wheel we could borrow?
Would be much appreciated. No, we can troubleshoot how to fix that. So
yeah,
basically, I'm gonna also need a funnel because the opening is so small. Funnel. So usually after you've sanded the piece on the wheel, you would like dust it out. You tap it out like this, just because you don't want to have any dust in there when you put water. And then basically, you probably want to fill it about a quarter of the way full. Shake it out, and then you basically want to make sure the entire inside, everywhere it gets water.
So you spin it to make sure the water is going everywhere.
And then you want to shake it out because you don't want to flip it back over and have any water like sit, because later the foot would actually kind of like collapse on itself.
And if you have a sponge, you usually at that moment just sort of sponge it out because everything is sanded, so you're just getting all of the dust out of the bottle.
But so basically the bottle is completely dust free, so we still rinse them in the bisque state just to be extra safe, but we always wash everything before it goes in the green state.
That's wild.
Yeah, that's something we learned in Jing2Jen because like we weren't doing that before and we had this problem. And the way you can test if your pieces have this problem or not, it's mainly only pieces like vases that hold water, is like you can get a piece of like brown craft paper and fill your pieces with water and just leave them for 24 hours and see if there's any damp ring underneath it. Because if that's on someone's like wood table, it would probably raise the grain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered everything, unless anyone has like anything else that they would like to see or talk about
There's
aside from the Bobo.
so tired. He likes to
Oh,
eat slip, which is very weird. Only low fire clay bodies though. He's not interested in any mid-range ones.
It just tastes better, I think.
They must taste like earthier. He like will eat. We have to be careful. We don't keep him on our low shelves because there's just like teeth marks in our earthenware pieces. And so yeah, he likes to eat like terracotta and earthenware basically.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think you really were super thorough there. Thank you for sharing so much of this with us.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I'm
Thank
trying
you. It was so nice to see your guys' see your studio and your process. Like it was really fun to see you. I feel like it's been locked up for so long. This is really nice.
You guys enjoyed it. Sierra's really good about talking about the process, so I'm glad she did it and it wasn't me.
not as means. But yeah, if anyone has any other specific slip casting questions, they can feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, other than that, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you for having us, essentially.
Yeah, thanks for hosting it.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.